Hello, welcome back to NMI. Today is Canada Day, and if you follow my channel, you know that last year I talked about the MCM70, a Canadian microcomputer from the 70s that is considered the first microcomputer as we know it. Well, this time I want to show you another very innovative Canadian machine, the NABU personal computer. So, get ready to explore the hardware, the software, and the design of the NABU PC. Before we proceed, what about subscribing to NMI and giving me a thumbs up? First of all, let's start with the name NABU. Every time I think of NABU, I think of a planet in a distant galaxy and the birthplace of Sheev Palpatine and Padme Amidala and Star Wars. Oh, but that is NABU. NABU has nothing to do with that. The name is in fact the Babylonian god of wisdom, writing, and scribes, and an acronym that stands for Natural Access to Bidirectional Utilities. But seriously, I still prefer the Star Wars perspective. Now, did you notice the acronym mentions access and bidirectional? That is because the NABU PC was designed from scratch to be a networked machine. And we're talking 1982. NABU was the brainchild of John Kelly, founder and CEO of NABU Network. Let's take a look at the hardware and we will come back to the connectivity later. This is the machine. You can see it is designed to not look like a traditional 80s computer. That is because this machine was designed to sit beside the video cassette recorder, hi-fi equipment, and other multimedia equipment that inhabited the TV rooms in the early 80s. The keyboard is detached from the processor unit. It communicates using a serial protocol and it has its own microcontroller, a Motorola 6803. In fact, the keyboard also hosts two 9-pin D connectors for joysticks. This way, the processor unit could be installed in the media console or rack, and the users could sit comfortably on the couch and type on the keyboard or play games. By the way, this keyboard is one of the best keyboards I had a chance to try on 8-bit machines. It is really good. The processor unit has only two switches on the front panel, on-off and reset. There are 4 LEDs of different colors that signal on-off, pause, communication status, and error. On the back, there is a round DIN connector for communications adapter, a 15-pin connector for a printer, a DIN connector for the keyboard, audio output, composite video output, the usual TV channel selector, and 2 coaxial connectors for cable in and cable out. There are also 4 removable panels that probably allowed for some sort of expansion. But let's go back to the coaxial connectors. That is extremely unusual, right? Personal computers in the 80s did not have this kind of connection. That is commonly found on cable modems. So why are they there? Well, that is exactly because the NABU PC was designed to also work in a way that resembles the modern cable modems. In fact, the actual communications adapter was a box about the same size of the main unit, that would perform most of the work of decoding the signal from the cable and supply a bidirectional data stream to the NABU PC via the adapter port. Now let's take a look inside the NABU PC. Wow! The first thing we can see is that there are 4 main ICs here. A Z80A, which is the microprocessor running NABU software. A TMS9918A, which is the video display controller. an AY38910, which is the programmable sound generator, and a TR1863, which is the dedicated UART. There are also two separate RAM blocks. One 64 kilobyte block connected to the Z80, one 16 kilobyte connected to the TMS9918A. This is the video memory. We can also see four very unusual connectors, or in fact 30 pin headers, which are supposed to be used for expansion cards. I have to say that it is disappointing to see such an amazing design using these crappy connectors. I mean, I totally understand using these connectors on a hobby project, and I did and do that all the time, but on a commercial product, I don't think so. And single row? Maybe these connectors were mostly intended for internal use or something like that, or maybe debugging and development. Who knows? Maybe some sort of cost reduction. If you know, please leave a comment on this video. I would love to learn more about that. Note that along with the 8-bit NABU 1100 based on the Z80A, NABU also manufactured a 16-bit business machine, the NABU 1600, based on the 8086 that could run CPM86, Xenix, and QNX. Well, aside from the odd expansion connectors, maybe you notice that the hardware selection resembles another famous 8-bit machine of the 80s, the MSX. Yes, in general, the NABU follows most of the MSX standard pretty well. The MSX standard was announced on June 16, 1983, and it was based mostly on the Spectra Video SV328 microcomputer, also introduced around that same time. But the NABU was released in 1982. The NABU PC was designed from the ground up to be a connected machine. It relied almost entirely on the NABU network for loading anything. Almost entirely because it could boot from a floppy disk if you had a floppy drive. When the machine is powered up, it tries to find the communications adapter, and from there it waits for a cycle to begin. Did I mention the maximum speed was 6.312 megabits per second? I mean, wow! Just to give you an idea, around that time, 10 megabps computer networks were only available on large computers and workstations, and they were not cheap and only for local networking. Keep in mind that the usual transfer speeds back then were around a few hundreds of bytes per second for cassettes and up to a couple or tens of kilobytes per second for floppy drives. NABU's 6.312 megabps meant almost instant loading time for any application or game. Remember, the machine has only 64 kilobytes of RAM for applications. If you ever loaded a game from a cassette or even a 1541 drive on a Commodore 64, you know what I'm talking about. I have other videos on my channel showing load times on Commodore 64 and Apple IIe, in case you're curious. But believe me, the NABU was freaking fast, and much faster than any of its competitors in terms of loading time when using the NABU network. Back to the NABU network, it consisted of a central server that periodically broadcasted software over the cable. A cycle included the OS and the menu navigation software. And from there, the user could select applications, games, news, and other services. Now, there is a catch. The potential instant loading times I mentioned before did not really happen, because the user would have to wait for the software they selected to be broadcasted again in the cycle. So in practice, there was always a variable lag between selecting something from the cycle menu and having it running on your machine. The company envisioned a multitude of services to be offered, including news, stock market, weather, sports, and even online banking and shopping. Does that resemble something? Yes, that is basically internet before the internet. Not all that vision turned into reality, but still, the system was way ahead of its time and was mind-blowing, considering we are talking here about early 80s. The system used a subscription model, and for $8 a month, equivalent to $23.60 in 2025, the subscriber could have access to the basic package that included entertainment, education, including programming language such as BASIC and Logo, home management, news, etc. Other packages were available, just like current TV providers, with extra content such as better games and other software. Isn't that cool? But the system also had a few issues, in my humble opinion. First, even though the networking system was bidirectional by design, and that allowed users to upload data and store contents in the remote server or cloud if you prefer, the reality of the 80s is that the cable TV systems were mostly unidirectional and designed to only downstream analog TV signals. And, at least in Ottawa, where the first NABU network was deployed, there was no upstream capability. That meant users could not send information back to the NABU server using the network system. Can you imagine if they could? Oh my! On top of that, even if upstreaming were available, it would suffer from technical issues from a shared communication media. The more users, the slower it would be. Downstream was fast because all subscribers received the same data. Second, even though NABU PC's initial price tag was kind of high, around $950 Canadian, equivalent to $2,800 in 2025, apparently it could also be rented for about $19.95, equivalent to $59 in 2025. While the price was compatible with the market back then, there was an ongoing war between the major brands, Atari, Apple, Commodore, Tandy, and TI, with prices falling almost monthly and millions of units being manufactured. And while those systems had basically no constraints in terms of geographic market, the NABU PC did not make sense without its network. So its potential market was bound by the company's ability to partner with cable TV providers and deploy new networks, which was probably not very easy. Even in Ottawa, where the first network was deployed, only part of the city had coverage by the partner, Skyline Cablevision. Other smaller deployments included Alexandria in the US and Sowa in Japan. The third issue, in my opinion, is the considerable dependency on its connectivity. I mean, the NABU network was the main way to get software, and since it was mostly unidirectional, only downstream, and there was no cassette port, the only other option was to use a floppy drive that could be rented for about $10 a month. Which is not bad at all, but it was an extra cost for subscribers. Maybe that's not even a major issue if we consider that floppy drives in the 80s were expensive anyway. So paying $10 a month was probably a good deal. Apparently, a 10 megabyte hard drive was also available, but I don't have information on it. So okay, We have an amazing machine with an incredible new service disrupting the market. What went wrong? Well, I don't think there is a simple answer to that question. But the operational costs of the company were probably very high, in particular with a subscription model where the company had a high upfront cost, manufacturing the machines, to be paid over time with rental income. Keep in mind that RAM and microprocessor prices were falling almost monthly as competition and manufacturing increased, so that upfront cost versus the potential quick depreciation of the hardware probably made it financially hard on the company. Now think about all the infrastructure around the NABU PCs. Manufacturing, servers, software, updates, services. That was probably very expensive to maintain. On top of that, NABU was a newcomer in a market where the competitors had a solid lead with millions of units sold. Not to mention that NABU had to manufacture and supply not only the computers but also the adapters. On that note, according to Don Sawyer, former director of product planning for NABU, he proposed, along with other employees in early 1983, right after CES, that the company focused only on an universal adapter that could be used with any machine, instead of manufacturing a computer, the NABU PC, and an adapter that only worked with it. Sawyer left the company at the end of '83, and sometime later, NABU started to offer some adapters for other home microcomputers, but it was already too late. It is also important to consider that personal computers and home computers were still a very new concept, and most cable TV subscribers did not promptly embrace the idea of a connected microcomputer. By the end of 1984, the NABU network had about 1,500 subscribers in Ottawa and about 700 in Alexandria, US. Not enough to keep the company afloat. A year later, another network was deployed in Showa, Japan, in collaboration with ASCII Corporation, the company behind MSX, and added a few tens of subscribers. To make things worse, in November 1984, the main shareholder and largest creditor of the company, Campo Corporation, pulled the plug and all employees were laid off. The former CEO, John Kelly, formed a new company and rehired a few of the employees that were laid off and tried to keep the company going. But with only a few employees, about 40, few subscribers, and unable to keep the operation, by August 1986, the company closed its doors for good. So, was it the fierce competition of other microcomputers? The inability to expand the network to other cities? The focus on a proprietary machine? A concept that was too far ahead of its time? It is really hard to say. But that was 40 years ago. The NABU network disappeared, and NABU PCs were rendered mostly useless. That was until 2009, when the York University Computer Museum in Toronto demonstrated the NABU running with its network, and the development of an emulator started. Fast forward to 2022, and DJ Sures, a Canadian entrepreneur, YouTuber, hacker, and developer, along with Leo Binkowski, a former software developer and later director of content with NABU, started the NABU Preservation Project. DJ Sures wrote an adapter software that can be hosted on a modern PC and can exchange data with the NABU. It can not only send but also receive data from the NABU, meaning that finally the NABU can reach its full potential. Now let's take a look at some of the amazing software now available for the NABU PC. As I mentioned before, thanks to the close similarity to the MSX standard, developers ported and are still porting MSX games and software to the NABU. Check it out. Now, let me show you something. Since it's Canada Day and the NABU PC is proudly Canadian, I wrote a basic program that I want to show you. The NABU BASIC is very similar to the MSX BASIC, and it also implements the play instruction. Years ago, I wrote an RTTTL player as part of my book on HCS08 devices. And guess what? RTTTL is very similar to the music macro language implemented by the play command. So I translated a tune and NABU is gonna play it for you. Cool, isn't it? The NABU and its network were really ahead of their time. Maybe too far ahead? The commercial failure of NABU is really sad, but I find the NABU PC and its networking system amazing. And an amazing example of Canadian ingenuity. And that makes me an even prouder Canadian. And thanks to the hard work of DJ Sures, Leo Binkowski, and others, we can experience this incredible machine in 2025. By the way, what do you think of NABU and its concept? Let me know in the comments. Well, I hope you liked this video. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to NMI to get notified of new content. And see you next time. Bye!